A 90-year-old veteran and ranch owner faces off against a ruthless gang of bikers. A sudden incident forces her to recall past battles and stand up to defend her homeland. A tense confrontation unfolds, where experience and strategy play the decisive role. With every passing minute, the battle intensifies and every second is filled with adrenaline. Heroic actions by the veterans and bold tactical maneuvers shift the course of the battle. Dangerous moments and unexpected twists keep the audience in constant suspense. The final showdown approaches, promising an epic outcome and fateful decisions. Stay tuned to find out how the story ends, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Many more exciting stories lie ahead. At the break of an early autumn morning in Sundance Ridge, a remote community tucked away in the rugged foothills of Wyoming, Evelyn Mercer began another day on her sprawling ranch and modest farm. The old homestead, a patchwork of weathered barns, silos, and sprawling pastures dotted with grazing cattle, had been her sanctuary for decades, a refuge far from the tumult of her past and the relentless march of time. Although Evelyn's body bore the marks of 90 long years, her eyes shone with a determined glimmer that recalled the fierce spirit she had once embodied during her service in Vietnam. The memory of distant battlefields, when she had soared in perilous missions and risked everything for her country, now blended with the quiet rhythm of daily rural life, a testament to a life lived fully on the edge of danger and devotion. This morning, like many before it, began with the gentle hum of nature, the low call of a distant bird, the rustling of wind through golden fields, and the steady clatter of old farm equipment. Yet beneath the serene surface, an undercurrent of anticipation pulsed through the landscape. Evelyn's instincts, honed over decades of hardship and heroism, sensed that something was amiss even before the first light had fully warmed the horizon. It was as if the silence around her held secrets waiting to be revealed. The vast skies, tinted with hues of blush and amber, offered little warning of the impending chaos that would soon disturb the delicate balance of life at the ranch. Evelyn moved deliberately across the creaking wooden floors of her farmhouse, her measured steps echoing the resilience that had carried her through storms both literal and metaphorical. Each room, decorated with relics of a bygone era, medals from her wartime service, faded photographs of comrades, and rustic mementos of a life of grit and sacrifice, spoke silently of battles fought and won. As she prepared a modest breakfast, her thoughts wandered back to memories of Vietnam, recalling the camaraderie of soldiers who had shared in the burden of war, and the quiet moments of reflection amid the chaos. It was these recollections that sustained her, infusing her with a quiet strength that had become the cornerstone of her existence. Outside, the day advanced steadily, and the first visitors to the ranch were the cattle, nudging each other in their habitual morning ritual. Yet even among the familiar sights and sounds of rural life, there lingered an unsettling tension, a harbinger of disruption in the otherwise unbroken cadence of her daily routine. At the edge of the property, where the wild prairie met the cultivated fields, Evelyn noticed a disturbance, a cloud of dust rising from the distant road that led into Sundance Ridge. The sight stirred something deep within her, a recollection of not long ago when danger had crept in unannounced, its presence as palpable as the distant echoes of an old conflict. As the dust cloud neared, the unmistakable roar of engines and the clatter of metal on asphalt reached her ears. In the distance, a band of motorcycles emerged, their presence incongruous with the peaceful pastoral setting. The riders, clad in leather and adorned with symbols of a notorious gang whose reputation for lawlessness had spread far beyond the urban sprawls, rode with an air of brazen defiance. Their vehicles, polished to a mirror sheen yet exuding an aura of menace, glinted ominously in the early sun. For a moment, Evelyn paused in her morning tasks, her seasoned mind registering the intrusion with the clarity of a battle-scarred veteran on high alert. The gang, known by whispered monikers in hushed tones among locals, had long been a specter of unrest on the outskirts of communities much like Sundance Ridge. Their arrival was always marked by a deliberate display of dominance, a show of power meant to unsettle and subdue. As the motorcycles circled slowly around the ranch's perimeter, their rumbling engines creating an unsettling symphony that clashed with the natural calm, Evelyn's thoughts raced back to her days in the jungles of Southeast Asia. There, amid the chaos of conflict, she had learned to read the language of impending violence, to sense the hostility in the silence before a storm. Now, confronted with this modern manifestation of brutality, those memories stirred a resolute defiance. Without a word, Evelyn surveyed the scene from the window of her farmhouse. The rider's eyes, hidden behind tinted visors and hardened expressions, scanned her property with an unsettling mixture of curiosity and contempt. Their presence was a silent challenge, a provocation meant to erode the confidence of those who had built their lives on the hard-earned peace of rural isolation. Yet, in that moment, the ranch did not feel small or defenseless. Instead, it seemed to pulse with the quiet, indomitable spirit of its owner, a woman whose life had been forged in the crucible of war and whose heart now beat in time with the land she so loved. There was no immediate confrontation, no explosive clash of words or weapons. Instead, an invisible line was drawn between the intruders and the sanctity of Evelyn's domain. The riders, confident in their numbers and emboldened by their own bravado, maintained their circle, their posture a blend of arrogance and anticipation. In the soft light of the morning, the contrast between the serenity of the ranch and the raw intensity of the biker gang could not have been starker. It was as if two worlds had collided, the peaceful, weathered legacy of a lifetime spent tending to the land, and the disruptive, violent allure of modern renegades seeking to impose their will through sheer intimidation. Even as the gang's presence unsettled the otherwise placid rhythm of the day, Evelyn's thoughts turned to the practical matters of safeguarding her home. Memories of past encounters, both on the battlefield and in the quiet skirmishes of daily life, coalesced into a singular resolve. She recalled a time when a simple phone call had altered the course of events, when an ally from the ranks of her comrades in arms had come to her aid in a moment of peril. In those instances, her courage had been met with unwavering loyalty, a reminder that true strength often lay in the bonds of shared history and mutual respect. Now, as the dust cloud of the gang's approach swirled into clearer focus, the ranch seemed to hold its breath. Every creaking floorboard, every rustle of the wind through the prairie grass, became a silent witness to the unfolding drama. The peaceful morning had transformed into a prelude of conflict, where the legacy of a lifetime of sacrifice and duty was about to be tested once more. In the quiet before the storm, the spirit of Evelyn Mercer stood as a bulwark against the encroaching chaos, a living testament to the resilience of those who had faced the darkness and emerged, scarred yet unbowed. With measured determination and the calm assurance born of years spent in the face of adversity, Evelyn set her gaze upon the horizon where the riders now loomed. The quiet dignity that had carried her through the horrors of war now bolstered her resolve to defend the sanctuary she had built from the ravages of both nature and man. Every detail of the landscape, the creaking fence posts, the weathered barn siding, and the distant, snow-capped peaks, seemed to echo her silent vow, that no force, however unruly or ruthless, would unseat the hard-won peace of Sundance Ridge. And so, in that crisp Wyoming morning, as the dust settled and the tension mounted, the stage was set for an encounter that would once again test the limits of courage, legacy, and the unyielding spirit of a warrior. In the tense aftermath of the gang's silent intrusion, the ranch's heartbeat shifted from the calm cadence of rural life to a subtle, insistent drum of impending conflict. The atmosphere around Sundance Ridge grew dense with unspoken challenge, as if the very land sensed that the delicate balance of peace was on the brink of shattering. As the rumble of the motorcycles subsided into the distance, leaving only the echo of their defiant presence, Evelyn Mercer set about preparing for what might come next. The early light of the Wyoming morning had hardened into a determined glare, and every element of the ranch, from the time-worn barns to the weathered planks of the farmhouse, seemed to absorb the intensity of the moment. Evelyn's eyes, steeled by decades of hardship and valor, wandered over the fields as she walked along the long, dusty drive that wound its way past grazing cattle and overgrown hedges. Memories of her service in Vietnam mingled with the present, forming a tapestry of experiences that had prepared her for moments such as these. The recollections of distant battlefields, when she had risked life and limb to complete daring sorties, lent her the inner fortitude to face modern-day threats. Her mind recalled the names of comrades who had stood by her in moments of dire need, a brotherhood forged in the crucible of war, and she silently hoped that such loyalty might yet find expression on these quiet lands. Not far from the main house, nestled behind a cluster of weathered outbuildings, a battered old rotary phone on a rickety wooden table awaited its summons. Its chipped porcelain dial and frayed handset had been a constant companion during long, solitary nights. In a deliberate yet measured pace, Evelyn approached it with the assurance of a seasoned warrior preparing for an essential battle. Without haste, she dialed a number that had been etched into her memory over years of shared hardship and mutual trust, a number belonging to a steadfast friend and fellow veteran who now commanded respect as a leader within a loosely organized group of ex-servicemen who had turned their skills to safeguarding communities in the modern age. As the phone rang in the stillness of the morning, the quiet buzz of the ranch was interrupted by distant hums of activity. In the nearby town of Pine Hollow, nestled in the rolling plains of Montana far to the north, word had begun to spread about the stirring of unrest in remote communities. Evelyn's call, however, was personal and resolute, a call not merely for assistance, but for the reawakening of a bond formed in fire and blood. The connection that had once bridged the jungles of a far-off land now transcended geography, uniting two kindred spirits through a shared commitment to justice and honor. In a modest office in Pine Hollow, a man known as Steel Sam answered the call. His reputation among veteran circles was legendary. His robust figure and unwavering gaze lent him the presence of someone who had not only survived the rigors of combat but had also dedicated his later years to the cause of protecting the defenseless. Though his domain was no longer a battlefield but a series of community watch posts and civic initiatives, the resolve of his spirit remained unchanged. Upon hearing Evelyn's measured, resolute tone on the other end of the line, Steel Sam's thoughts immediately aligned with the gravity of the situation. He recalled how, in their shared past, each mission had demanded not only physical bravery but also the wisdom to recognize when to rally allies and when to hold one's ground. As Steel Sam prepared to mobilize his network of fellow veterans, the scene back at Sundance Ridge unfolded in a manner that spoke of a land poised between the past and the present. Evelyn's call had been answered not only by a single man but by a whole community of those who had once faced the perils of combat and now found solace in protecting small towns and remote homesteads from the encroaching forces of lawlessness. In the gathering hours after the call, the ranch became a hub of quiet activity. Trained dogs began to patrol the perimeters, their keen noses sniffing the air for any sign of trouble. Alongside the cattle and the rustling fields, an undercurrent of vigilance spread, a silent message to any who might consider challenging the dignity of this sanctuary. Meanwhile, in a nearby utility shed converted into a makeshift command center, Evelyn methodically reviewed every detail of the situation. Maps, some old and frayed, lay sprawled over a broad wooden table, their contours marking the boundaries of her land and the adjoining roads that wound through the countryside. With the measured deliberation of a seasoned strategist, she began plotting the possible courses of action. Every route, every intersection, was a potential point of conflict or opportunity. The memories of past missions, when she had directed troops through unfamiliar territories under fire, were now invoked as she meticulously analyzed the landscape around her ranch. It was not merely a matter of defense but of preserving a way of life that had been built on the pillars of honor, community, and the steadfast bond between land and those who loved it. As the hours passed, the initially palpable tension gave way to a quiet determination that filled every crevice of the homestead. Outside, the wind picked up and danced across the sprawling fields, carrying with it whispers of change and the promise of a hard-fought contest between order and chaos. The quiet murmur of wildlife, now joined by the distant sound of approaching vehicles, marked the shifting tide. With every moment that ticked by, the prospect of confrontation loomed larger. Yet, amidst the uncertainty, there was also an unyielding belief that justice would prevail, a conviction born from years of personal sacrifice and countless battles fought both abroad and at home. The call from Pine Hollow had set in motion a series of events that transcended the confines of a single ranch. Steel Sam, along with several other veterans, men and women who had once marched in unison under the banner of patriotism, began to mobilize. They drove their pickup trucks and SUVs along long stretches of country roads, their headlights cutting through the early twilight as they converged on Sundance Ridge. Their arrival was not announced with the clamor of modern militarism, but rather with the quiet dignity of those who had learned that true strength lay in restraint and careful calculation. Every veteran's face, weathered by years and etched with memories of past conflicts, now bore the focused intensity of one about to reclaim a piece of the past in service of the present. Back at the ranch, Evelyn continued her measured preparations. She gathered old photographs and relics from a dusty cabinet, items that chronicled a life of valor and sacrifice, and arranged them carefully in a place of honor on the mantelpiece. Each item, from medals glinting in the muted light to faded letters that recounted moments of camaraderie, was a reminder of battles fought in distant lands and of a time when every decision carried the weight of life and death. These symbols of her past were not merely mementos, they were the bedrock of her identity, a testament to the unwavering commitment that had defined her life. The arrival of the veterans brought a palpable shift in the air. Their vehicles, a motley collection of well-worn pickups and motorcycles modified for practicality rather than flash, parked along the drive and in the clearing near the main barn. There was no ostentatious display of force, only a quiet solidarity that spoke volumes about the unspoken pact between those who had seen the worst of human conflict and now sought to protect the fragile peace of the communities they had chosen to serve. As they disembarked and began discussing tactics in hushed yet resolute tones, the scene evoked images of an old guard coming together in the twilight of their lives, ready to face a new kind of battle with the same steadfastness that had defined their youth. In the soft light of the mid-morning sun, as the veterans gathered and the soft murmur of their voices mingled with the rustle of the prairie, Evelyn's thoughts turned inward. She reflected on the contrast between the violent memories of her past and the gentle rhythm of life that had since taken root at Sundance Ridge. Here, the battles were fought not in the dense jungles of Vietnam, but on open fields and quiet back roads where the enemy was not always a faceless force from a distant land, but a creeping lawlessness that threatened the very fabric of community life. The weight of her experiences bore down upon her, yet it also fueled an unyielding desire to shield the legacy of her home, to ensure that the sacrifices of the past were not rendered meaningless by the chaos of the present. The strategizing continued in the soft hum of morning activity, punctuated by the arrival of additional reinforcements who had answered the silent call for unity and resilience. In the background, the low rumble of approaching vehicles signaled that news of the disturbance had spread beyond the immediate vicinity, stirring echoes of unrest in neighboring areas. Still, within the secure perimeter of the ranch, a sense of control and deliberate purpose reigned. The veterans, now aligned with Evelyn's resolve, meticulously mapped out a network of watch points and safe havens, integrating modern technology with time-tested instincts honed over decades of service. They communicated through discrete signals and prearranged codes, ensuring that every movement was calculated, every step taken with the precision of a soldier on a mission. As the day advanced, the distant echoes of the motorcycle gang's earlier presence faded into a memory that would soon be replaced by the surging tide of organized resistance. Yet, the shadow of that threat remained, a silent reminder that the forces of chaos were not easily vanquished. Evelyn, standing amidst the carefully laid plans and the determined faces of her compatriots, felt a surge of pride and resolve. The old ranch, with its storied past and steadfast owner, was about to become the stage for a contest of wills, a confrontation where the honor of a community would be defended with every ounce of grit and determination left in its aging champions. Every minute that passed deepened the sense of anticipation. The veterans patrolled the boundaries with the quiet vigilance of guardians who had weathered countless storms, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. In the distance, the murmurs of discontent began to stir once more as scattered groups of dissenters, agents of the very lawlessness that had intruded earlier, made tentative forays towards the periphery. Though their numbers were few, their intent was clear, to unsettle the resolve of those who dared to reclaim their peace. Yet, every step they took was mirrored by the unwavering stance of the ranch's defenders, a silent promise that any attempt to erode the sanctity of Sundance Ridge would be met with unyielding force. Amid the heightened state of alert, Evelyn's mind wandered to the faces of those she had served with, the quiet heroes who had, against overwhelming odds, persevered in the face of insurmountable challenges. It was not just a battle for a tract of land or the preservation of a peaceful way of life, it was a struggle for dignity, for the right to honor the past while forging a future built on solidarity and shared purpose. The weight of these memories, both bitter and sweet, lent a transcendent quality to the proceedings. It was as if every grain of dirt, every whisper of wind through the sagebrush, carried the voices of those who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with her in distant conflicts, now lending their silent strength to the cause at hand. In the midst of this orchestrated readiness, time itself seemed to slow down. The sunlight, now climbing steadily across the vast Montana sky visible over the distant ridge, bathed the land in a warm, resolute glow. The natural world, cattle ambling in the pastures, birds soaring high above, and even the rustle of dry leaves stirred by a gentle breeze, seemed to unite in the collective heartbeat of a community bracing itself for the inevitable clash between order and disorder. Every element of nature, every sound and every movement, resonated with the sense that change was at hand, a transformation born of struggle, tempered by resilience, and guided by the unspoken promise of a new day. Within the quiet command center of the ranch, as maps and plans were spread out and scrutinized, Evelyn's presence remained a steady beacon. The lines on her face, etched with the wisdom of 90 years, softened only slightly as she regarded the preparations with a calm, reflective pride. It was in these moments, when the past and present converged in a single, charged tableau, that her inner strength shone most brilliantly. The legacy of her youthful courage, the enduring bonds forged in the heat of battle, and the deep love for the land she now nurtured merged into an unwavering resolve to protect all that was dear. In that steadfast heart, the spark of rebellion against the encroaching chaos burned with an intensity that belied the passage of time. As the day moved inexorably forward, the stage was being set for a confrontation that would ripple far beyond the borders of Sundance Ridge. The quiet fortification of a humble ranch had become a symbol, a rallying point for those who believed that, regardless of age or circumstance, the spirit of resistance and the pursuit of justice could never be fully subdued. The converging forces of old comrades and local patriots were preparing to transform the landscape of conflict, drawing on memories of valor and the steadfast bonds of loyalty that had once seen them through the darkest of nights. In the midst of this unfolding drama, Evelyn Mercer remained both a guardian and a witness, a living embodiment of resilience, duty, and the enduring power of the human spirit. With every measured step, every carefully laid plan, she prepared to face the uncertainties of the day ahead. The echoes of her past resonated in every thoughtful decision, every quiet maneuver intended to safeguard the legacy of a life well lived. And as the sun climbed higher, casting its golden light upon the land, it illuminated not just the ranch, but the hearts of those gathered there, hearts united in a common cause, steadfast in their determination to stand against the rising tide of lawlessness. Thus, within the unfolding tapestry of conflict and calm, the quiet determination of one veteran's enduring spirit wove itself into the fabric of a community ready to defend its honor. The road ahead was fraught with challenges, but the resolute solidarity displayed on that Wyoming morning promised that no force, however unruly or insidious, could erase the hard-earned legacy of those who had dedicated their lives to protecting the sanctity of home and hearth. As the sun continued its inexorable climb over the rugged Montana horizon, the atmosphere around Sundance Ridge grew charged with a palpable intensity. In the lingering aftermath of early mobilizations, the sprawling homestead was abuzz with meticulous preparations that spoke of both urgency and deep-seated resolve. Evelyn Mercer, whose life had been a tapestry of battlefields and quiet dawns on the ranch, now found herself at the nexus of a renewed conflict, one that would test not only the mettle of her aged frame but also the enduring spirit of a community that had long been forged in the fires of sacrifice and valor. The crisp air carried with it whispers of approaching danger, mingling with the earthy scent of tilled soil and the sweet aroma of ripening sage. The veterans, their expressions etched with lines of past hardships and fresh determination, moved with a slow, deliberate purpose around the property. Every careful step taken on the weathered planks of the barn floor and every whispered instruction exchanged beneath the low hum of the early morning was a reminder that this was no ordinary day on the ranch. Instead, it was a day that bore the weight of memories and the anticipation of an impending clash between order and lawlessness. In the quiet corners of the ranch, where shadows danced in the interplay of light and dust, Evelyn surveyed the land as though reading an ancient map. Her eyes, a window to decades of unspoken battles, absorbed the subtle shifts in the natural world, a change in the rhythm of the wind, the distant rustle of leaves against time-worn fences, and even the muted sound of cattle shifting in their pens. Each element of nature seemed to pulse with the urgency of the moment. And she, the steadfast guardian of these lands, recognized that every nuance could be the precursor to chaos or the herald of salvation. Within the confines of the converted command center, a modest room once used for storage but now repurposed as a hub of strategy, the veterans continued to refine their plans. Maps were unrolled with painstaking care, their creases a testament to years of use and the scars of previous conflicts. Detailed sketches marked the approach routes that might be taken by those who sought to disrupt the fragile peace of Sundance Ridge. In the dim light, the careful notation of potential weak points and safe havens was a quiet act of rebellion against the encroaching disorder. Here, in that room, the legacy of past battles merged with the pressing needs of the present, every line drawn, every strategy formed, was imbued with the spirit of a bygone era and the hope of a future reclaimed by courage. Outside, the land itself appeared to hold its breath. The open fields, usually a serene expanse of gently swaying grasses and rolling hills, now played host to an unusual stillness. The few scattered cattle, sensing the tension in the air, huddled in quiet clusters near the barn, their instinctive wariness mirroring the emotions of their human counterparts. In the distance, faint sounds of vehicles on gravel roads hinted at additional reinforcements converging on the homestead. The synchronized movement of these reinforcements, though not yet visible to the naked eye, promised to add new layers of strength to the already formidable defenses. Evelyn's mind, though hardened by decades of warfare, found solace in the natural order that surrounded her. Memories of jungles, firefights, and perilous missions in distant lands now intermingled with the present landscape, a mosaic of sunlit fields and time-worn structures that had become the stage for a modern-day stand against tyranny. She recalled the days when the cacophony of war was a constant companion, when every decision was a life-or-death gamble, and the bond between comrades was the only assurance of survival. Those recollections, both bittersweet and fiercely vivid, now fueled her determination to defend the sanctity of her home and the dignity of the community that had gathered in solidarity around her. As the morning matured into a charged afternoon, the first clear signs of an external threat began to materialize. Shadows lengthened along the edges of the property as figures emerged on distant roads, individuals whose silhouettes betrayed a purposeful intent to disturb the established order. These were not the masked faceless marauders of urban legends, they were organized, their movements coordinated with a precision that spoke of training and determination. Yet, for every step they took toward Sundance Ridge, the veterans' readiness grew. Every rumble of an engine, every fleeting glimpse of a determined face behind tinted visors, intensified the unspoken promise of a counteroffensive. On a modest rise near the southern boundary of the ranch, an old water tower stood as a silent sentinel, its rusted frame a relic of a time when the community was smaller and the challenges fewer. Now, it served as a vantage point for the vigilant watchmen scattered across the fields. From this height, one of the younger veterans, whose youthful vigor belied his hardened exterior, scanned the horizon with binoculars, his trained eyes searching for the slightest movement. The image of him, resolute and unwavering, resonated deeply with Evelyn, who recognized in that determination the very essence of what had kept her going through decades of conflict and hardship. In the ensuing hours, as the sky shifted through a palette of brilliant blues and soft pastels, a series of deliberate maneuvers began to unfold. Veterans moved in coordinated clusters, securing key access routes and reinforcing barricades with materials salvaged from old structures and repurposed farm equipment. The improvised defenses, though simple in their construction, were a formidable testament to ingenuity and experience. Each barricade, Each hastily erected lookout post was a quiet defiance against the prospect of chaos, an assertion that even in the twilight of life, the will to protect and preserve could burn with the same fierce intensity as in the days of youthful valor. Meanwhile, the distant figures on the road drew nearer, their intentions as murky as the dust swirling in their wake. For those approaching, Sundance Ridge was more than a mere destination. It was a challenge, a beacon of resistance in a world increasingly adrift in moral ambiguity. As the veterans relayed updates through coded gestures and terse nods, the sense of imminent confrontation mounted. The quiet rustle of leaves, the whisper of the wind through the fields, and the steady pulse of determination in every heart merged into a symphony of defiance, a collective rhythm that would soon be set against the discordant notes of impending conflict. In the fields beyond the main compound, a group of local townsfolk, inspired by the resolute stand of the veterans and the commanding presence of Evelyn Mercer, began to gather. Their arrival was not marked by the pomp of formal assembly but by the quiet determination of everyday citizens prepared to lend their strength to the cause. Farmers, shopkeepers, and retired tradesmen formed a loose but effective line of defense along the outer perimeters, their faces reflecting a mix of apprehension and steely resolve. They knew that the integrity of their community, and the hard-won tranquility of the rural landscape, depended on the unyielding courage of those who had chosen to stand firm in the face of adversity. Evelyn's thoughts turned again to the many lives that had intertwined with hers along this long and winding road of survival. The veterans who now moved with deliberate precision, the neighbors who had joined their ranks without hesitation, and even the rustling grasses beneath her feet, all bore silent testimony to a legacy of courage that defied the passage of time. In that legacy, she saw both the wounds of past battles and the promise of a future yet to be written, a future that might emerge from the crucible of conflict as something renewed, something transcendent. The old ranch was not just a home, it was a living monument to resilience, a place where the scars of history were honored and transformed into symbols of hope and resistance. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, the first definitive actions of the approaching adversaries became clear. A small convoy of vehicles, unmistakably marked by the insignias of a renegade faction known for its ruthless tactics, rolled steadily toward Sundance Ridge. Their presence, like an ominous drumbeat, set the stage for the next phase of the unfolding conflict. It was not merely an invasion, it was a calculated attempt to unseat the peace that had long been the bedrock of this isolated haven. Each vehicle moved with a deliberate cadence, as though choreographed to the rising tension, while the drivers, their faces hidden behind reflective visors, exuded an air of cold determination. Inside the protective confines of the homestead, the veterans braced themselves for what was to come. The quiet coordination in the command center had now evolved into a full-scale mobilization. Every rusted tool, every piece of outdated machinery repurposed for defense, was brought to bear in the effort to secure Sundance Ridge. The careful arrangement of resources, the strategic positioning of lookouts along the ridge, and the seamless communication between the old guard and newly arrived allies coalesced into a picture of unity and preparedness. The ranch, steeped in the quiet dignity of decades past, was about to be thrust into a confrontation that would test its very soul. In that charged atmosphere, the boundaries between past and present, between memory and reality, blurred into a single, unyielding resolve. Evelyn Mercer, with her steadfast gaze and the wisdom born of 90 years, stood at the heart of this formidable bastion. Her presence was both a command and a comfort, a living reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the spirit of perseverance could never be extinguished. As she moved from one station to the next, offering silent guidance and measured reassurances, the collective heartbeat of the defenders quickened in time with the rhythm of the land. Each person, from the most battle-worn veteran to the humble farmer lending his strength, knew that the coming hours would define not just a skirmish on a dusty field but the very essence of their shared legacy. The impending clash was not merely about territory or power, it was a struggle for the very ideals that had sustained them through the worst of times, dignity, honor, and the unbreakable bond between a people and the land they cherished. In every measured step and every thoughtful glance exchanged under the watchful gaze of a fading sun, there lay an unspoken vow, that no matter the cost, the tranquility and legacy of Sundance Ridge would be preserved. The echoes of past sacrifices resonated deeply in the quiet determination of the defenders, each memory fueling the unyielding resolve to stand firm. As twilight deepened and the sky turned a somber shade of indigo, the first signs of direct confrontation began to take shape. The renegade convoy, now clearly visible against the deepening sky, edged closer to the fortified perimeter. Their headlights cast long, jittering beams over the rugged terrain, illuminating the faces of those who had gathered in silent, stoic anticipation. The land, which had borne witness to generations of struggle and triumph, now stood on the precipice of a new chapter, one where the quiet resilience of an aging veteran and her loyal comrades would once again be tested in the crucible of conflict. In that timeless moment, as nature itself seemed to hold its breath in solemn anticipation, the legacy of Evelyn Mercer and the community she had nurtured was poised to be written anew. Every element of the unfolding scene, from the ancient water tower to the meticulously mapped defenses, from the determined faces of the veterans to the approaching silhouettes of the renegade forces, merged into a single, unstoppable current of resolve. The old ranch, with its weathered structures and sacred grounds, had become both a refuge and a fortress, an enduring testament to the spirit of those who refused to yield in the face of adversity. Thus, as the encroaching forces drew near and the first whispers of conflict began to ripple through the twilight air, the stage was set for an inevitable clash, a confrontation where the past would meet the present in a dance of courage, sacrifice, and unyielding determination. In that charged stillness, every heartbeat, every rustle of wine through the sagebrush, and every determined gaze held the promise of a battle fought not only for survival but for the very soul of a community reborn from the embers of its storied past. As night draped its inky veil over the rugged expanse of Sundance Ridge, the ranch transformed into a theater of silent resolve and mounting tension. The day's preparations, honed over countless moments of uncertainty, now crystallized into a singular purpose, a final stand against the encroaching tide of chaos. The fading light revealed details that had been obscured in the glare of day, the earnest, weathered faces of the veterans, the stoic posture of local townsfolk who had rallied to the cause, and the time-worn features of a land that had borne witness to a lifetime of hardship and hope. In the cool twilight, Evelyn Mercer's presence shone as an unwavering beacon. Even at the age of 90, her bearing exuded an authority that belied her years, a living chronicle of battles fought both on distant battlefields and in the quiet struggles to protect home and heritage. The convoys of renegade vehicles, their engines now a low and steady murmur against the chorus of crickets and rustling sagebrush, edged closer to the fortified perimeter of the ranch. Their headlights, intermittent and jittering in the darkness, traced erratic patterns on the weathered wooden planks of the old barn and over the gently sloping fields. The rhythmic pulse of distant engines merged with the natural cadence of the night, a subtle reminder that while nature moved in predictable cycles, human conflict was prone to sudden and unpredictable eruptions. Every shadow seemed to carry the weight of unspoken threats. And every whispered gust of wind was laden with the potential for upheaval. In the heart of the homestead, inside the makeshift command center that had once been nothing more than a storeroom for forgotten tools, the veterans gathered around a large, scarred table. Maps and hand-drawn schematics lay spread before them, their lines and annotations marked with the urgency of lives at stake. Each carefully placed token on the map represented a potential vantage point or a weak link in their defenses. The low murmur of their strategic discussions was punctuated by measured nods and the soft tapping of fingers on the table's surface, as if every sound were a deliberate drumbeat urging them onward. The group, composed of men and women who had once braved the perils of combat, now applied their hard-won knowledge to the land they called home. Their eyes, lit with determination despite the fatigue etched into their features, flitted over the maps and indicators with the precision of seasoned tacticians. Outside, the expansive fields, once bathed in the mellow hues of dusk, now lay cloaked in shadow and intermittent moonlight. The soft glow from distant street lamps in the neighboring town of Iron Vale filtered through the open spaces, lending a surreal quality to the rugged terrain. Here and there, clusters of old machinery and repurposed farm equipment were arranged as impromptu barricades along the main access routes. The rustic fences, patched and reinforced over time, now served as more than markers of property. They were symbols of a community's determination to shield its legacy from those who sought to dismantle it through fear and violence. Every nail hammered into the weathered wood, every plank secured along the perimeter, stood as a silent testament to the unwavering resolve of those who refused to yield. Evelyn, her gaze ever watchful and her mind as sharp as it had been decades ago, moved from one station to another. Her measured steps on the cold, creaking floorboards were accompanied by brief, reassuring gestures, a subtle pat on a shoulder here, a steadying touch on an arm there. In the soft lamplight, her eyes scanned the room, absorbing both the strategic discussions and the quiet camaraderie that bound these disparate souls together. Though words were few, each shared glance carried the weight of history and the unspoken understanding that every moment in the coming hours could alter the fate of Sundance Ridge. The veterans, many of whom had once depended on her guidance during turbulent times in far-off lands, now looked to her as the embodiment of fortitude, a living link between the lessons of the past and the uncertainties of the present. A subtle tension permeated the air, a fusion of anticipation and reverence for what was to come. Every movement within the command center was deliberate, a calculated response to the inevitable approach of the renegade forces. Outside the walls of the homestead, the renegades themselves were beginning to mobilize. The sound of their engines grew more insistent, a distant clamor that vibrated through the stillness of the night. Occasional bursts of laughter and rough, guttural shouts echoed faintly across the open fields, signaling that the opposition was not merely a faceless mass but a group driven by their own ideology, a vision of dominance and anarchy that stood in stark contrast to the deep-rooted values of community and honor espoused by the defenders of Sundance Ridge. In the chill of the night, with the stars overhead offering a cold, indifferent witness, the first subtle movements of the conflict began. Patrols of vigilant veterans moved silently along the perimeter, their forms blending into the darkness as they took up positions behind natural cover. The night air, crisp and clear, carried the soft sound of footsteps on gravel, intermingled with the distant whir of an approaching engine. These guardians of the night, each a relic of a bygone era yet unyielding in their determination, communicated in quiet signals, an arm raised, a finger pointed toward a distant shape, ensuring that no detail went unnoticed. At the same time, a lone figure emerged from behind the main farmhouse. Wrapped in a weathered jacket and carrying a well-used rifle, this sentinel moved with a quiet purpose, his every step measured as he circled the outer bounds of the property. His role was one of vigilance, an observer whose duty was to spot the enemy before they could breach the defensive lines. The light of a small flashlight danced across the rough terrain as he scanned the horizon, his eyes keenly trained on the dark silhouettes moving with methodical intent. In these moments, the legacy of his youthful exploits, of nights spent on patrol in foreign lands under perilous conditions, was vividly reawakened. The quiet resolve in his gaze was a mirror of the unspoken promise that every defender, regardless of age, would hold fast to the belief that justice and honor were worth every sacrifice. Within the confines of the command center, strategic decisions were made with the clarity of experience. The veterans, aware that the upcoming confrontation might stretch the limits of their endurance, had already begun to distribute responsibilities. Some were assigned to secure key access points with booby traps fashioned from old farm implements and salvaged munitions, others took up positions as lookouts, their scopes and night vision devices calibrated to detect even the faintest hint of movement. The coordinated effort was reminiscent of past campaigns, where split-second decisions and unwavering focus had turned the tide of battle. Here, the stakes were no less significant. This was a fight for the soul of a community, a battle to preserve a legacy built on decades of hard-fought peace and mutual respect. As the hours wore on, the moon reached its zenith, casting an ethereal silver glow over the rugged landscape. In that luminous quiet, the two opposing forces edged ever closer, their destinies interwoven in a tapestry of defiance and resolve. The renegade convoy, now unmistakably visible in the pale light, had halted at a distance, their vehicles lined up in a rough formation that spoke of both intent and caution. The drivers, faces partially obscured by helmets and dark visors, exchanged curt glances as they assessed the situation, a silent dialogue of threat and challenge that rippled through the night air. On the far side of the ranch, where the boundary between cultivated fields and untamed wilderness blurred into shadow, Evelyn Mercer took a moment to reflect. The memories of her time in Vietnam, of long, arduous nights spent in the midst of chaos, of battles where each breath could be the last, flooded her mind. Yet in that recollection, there was not a trace of fear, only a steely determination that had seen her through the worst of times. Now, as she surveyed the scene before her, she found that same indomitable spirit rising within her once more. The legacy of her past, etched into every scar and every triumph, was the very foundation upon which the future of Sundance Ridge would be built. In the stillness that preceded the inevitable clash, every detail of the night seemed magnified. The gentle rustle of the wind through the pines, the soft murmur of distant water in the creek, and the steady hum of vigilance among the defenders all converged into a singular, unyielding moment of unity. The ranch, with its time-worn structures and fields that had nurtured generations, was poised to defend itself against an aggression that sought to undermine the very essence of community. The resolve of Evelyn Mercer and her band of veterans was not simply about repelling an external threat, it was a declaration that honor, dignity, and the bonds of shared history would prevail over the forces of lawlessness. As the renegade forces began to position themselves for an assault, a palpable electricity filled the air. Each member of the defending force understood that the next few hours would be a crucible, a test of both physical endurance and moral conviction. The strategic placements, the careful coordination, and the quiet determination of every soul on the ranch wove together a fabric of resistance that was as much about the spirit of the land as it was about the weapons and barricades that now stood in its defense. In that charged atmosphere, the boundary between past and present blurred further. The valor of a long-ago battlefield was reborn in the twilight struggle on these rural grounds. Under the silver glow of the moon, the first echoes of conflict began to manifest, a distant crash, the scraping of metal against stone, and the rapid, measured footsteps of those closing in. The renegade convoy, having stalled at the outer limits, now initiated a series of coordinated movements. Their actions were deliberate, meant to test the mettle of the defenders and provoke a reaction that would reveal any hidden vulnerabilities. In response, the veterans, with the quiet efficiency of those who had long learned to anticipate danger, adjusted their positions. Lookouts signaled silently to the central command, and a series of prearranged cues set into motion the final defensive maneuvers. In the ensuing moments, as the first tangible signs of confrontation echoed across the fields, the ranch seemed to come alive with an almost palpable energy. The interplay of light and shadow, of human determination and the relentless pulse of nature, created an atmosphere where every heartbeat carried the promise of resistance. Evelyn Mercer, standing at the forefront of her assembled defenders, embodied the synthesis of all that had led to this moment. A life defined by sacrifice, a spirit honed by decades of both battle and reflection, and an unwavering commitment to protect the sanctuary that was Sundance Ridge. In the ensuing clash, the defenders would not yield an inch. Every barricade, every strategically positioned lookout, every well-worn tool repurposed for defense was a testament to the legacy of those who had come before and a promise for those who would follow. The approaching sounds of conflict melded with the natural nocturne of the night, forming a symphony of defiance that would echo long after the first shots were fired. And as the renegade forces braced for the inevitable exchange, the ranch itself, its weathered walls and resilient spirit, stood ready to bear witness to a struggle that was as much about preserving a way of life as it was about the clash of opposing wills. Thus, under the vast, star-studded sky, the stage was set for a confrontation that would test the very limits of courage, unity, and the enduring power of a legacy forged in the crucible of hardship. In the quiet before the storm, every soul at Sundance Ridge knew that the battle they were about to face was not merely a physical struggle, but a profound affirmation that no matter how relentless the forces of chaos, the steadfast spirit of community and honor would always shine through, even in the darkest hours of the night. In the hours following the silent prelude of night, as the stars held their vigil over Sundance Ridge, the clash between the defenders and the encroaching marauders ignited with a sudden, jarring intensity. The old ranch, long a bastion of peace and perseverance, now became a cauldron of action, a crucible in which every decade of Evelyn Mercer's lifetime, every memory of Vietnam and every hard-won lesson of rural resilience, converged into a single moment of defiant struggle. The first burst of conflict erupted in the far reaches of the property, where the renegade convoy, emboldened by their night's tactical maneuvers, attempted to breach a weak point in the hastily erected barricade. The attackers, moving as a unit, pressed forward with a deliberate urgency that belied their rugged, unpolished appearance. Their headlights sliced through the darkness in staccato flashes, and the low, guttural shouts of their leaders punctuated the night air. In response, the veterans stationed at that outpost, seasoned by years of field operations and familiar with the rhythms of combat, met the assault with the quiet efficiency of trained guardians. With practiced precision, they repurposed old farm tools into makeshift weapons and directed a series of coordinated counterattacks that sent shockwaves through the advancing ranks. The clash was neither chaotic nor random, it was a calculated, bitter struggle for control of every inch of the homestead, each side weighing honor and survival in the balance of fleeting seconds. From the high ground of an old, rusted windmill, Evelyn surveyed the unfolding melee with a stoic composure. Her gaze, though softened by the passage of time, still burned with an intensity born of countless battles. In that moment, the memories of distant jungles and explosive firefights merged with the present as she recalled the countless times she had stood on the precipice of danger, armed with nothing but sheer will and a steadfast commitment to her comrades and her cause. The echoes of helicopter blades and the distant murmur of artillery from her wartime past resonated faintly in the background of her thoughts, yet they were tempered by the raw, unadorned reality of the present confrontation, a battle fought on open fields rather than in the claustrophobic confines of a jungle. As the initial skirmish reached a fevered pitch along the perimeter, the defenders regrouped and adapted with an agility that defied their advanced years. The tactical network established within the confines of the ranch proved its worth as each unit communicated silently and efficiently, signals passed in subtle glances and discreet hand gestures that spoke of a unity forged over decades. In one critical sector, a small group of veterans had taken refuge behind a sturdy stack of hay bales and rusted tractors, their positions carefully chosen to provide both cover and a strategic vantage point over an approaching lane. With deliberate calm, they unleashed a barrage of warning shots that echoed across the still night, serving both to disorient the invaders and to affirm their unwavering determination to defend their sanctuary. At the center of the chaos, the command center, illuminated by the soft glow of battery-powered lanterns and the intermittent flicker of a well-worn monitor, became the nerve center of the resistance. Here, aged maps and digital displays blended into a seamless tapestry of strategy as veteran tacticians recalibrated their defenses in real time. Every new piece of intelligence, every movement detected along the perimeter, was meticulously analyzed. The experience of a lifetime had taught these warriors the art of adaptation. They knew that rigid plans were the enemy of survival, and instead, they embraced a fluidity of purpose that allowed them to shift seamlessly from defensive posturing to proactive countermeasures. The rhythm of their coordinated actions, punctuated by the measured clicks of radios and the soft rustle of paper maps, provided a stark counterpoint to the frenzied shouts and clashing metal beyond the walls. In one particularly tense moment, a gap in the defenses threatened to unravel the carefully constructed barrier. A small group of renegades had exploited an overlooked section along the eastern boundary, their numbers swelling as they pressed forward with the determination of men convinced of their own invincibility. The alert came suddenly, a sharp cry from a young sentinel stationed near the dilapidated barn, and the response was immediate. A unit of veterans, led by a grizzled former sergeant whose voice resonated with the authority of hard-earned experience, mobilized to seal the breach. The ensuing encounter was swift and decisive. The veterans moved as one, their aged bodies still honed by the discipline of a lifetime of combat, and managed to drive the invaders back with a combination of precision and unyielding force. The attackers, caught off guard by the rapid counterstroke, faltered and retreated into the inky blackness, leaving behind the echo of their frustrated curses and the lingering trace of their defiance. Throughout the escalating confrontation, the spirit of Sundance Ridge seemed to animate the very earth beneath their feet. The fields, once gentle and unassuming, became the stage for a dance of shadows and sparks, a ballet of light and darkness as bullets streaked across the sky and barricades trembled under the force of near-miss impacts. The natural acoustics of the open land amplified every sound, the steady thump of boots on packed dirt, the sharp crack of improvised weaponry meeting its mark, and the collective, measured breaths of those who had come to defend a legacy that stretched far beyond the confines of any single night. Evelyn's mind, ever vigilant, wandered even as she coordinated with her closest lieutenants, ensuring that every sector of the homestead was accounted for and every potential threat anticipated. There was a deep, unspoken understanding among those gathered, a tacit acknowledgement that this battle was not merely a contest of firepower, but a struggle for the soul of a community. Every clash, every strategic maneuver, was imbued with the weight of decades of history and sacrifice. In the quiet intervals between bursts of conflict, the memory of fallen comrades and the promise of a better future for those still standing lent an almost sacred quality to their efforts. As the night deepened further, the chaos began to settle into a grim cadence. The renegades, having tasted the bitter fruit of resistance, attempted a second, more measured assault. This time, their approach was slower and more methodical, as if they were learning from the unexpected resilience of the defenders. Their movements were no longer those of a wild, impetuous force but of a calculated, embittered foe determined to test every weakness. In response, the veterans not only repelled the attack but began to initiate countermeasures aimed at disorienting and demoralizing the adversaries. A series of coordinated flares and smoke signals were deployed, not solely as a means of communication, but as a psychological tactic meant to cloak the ranch in an atmosphere of impenetrable mystery and defiance. On the periphery of the conflict, local townsfolk, farmers, shopkeepers, and retirees who had been drawn into the vortex of the unfolding drama by a shared sense of duty, began to play their own part in the defense. With little more than makeshift tools and an unwavering commitment to protect their homes, they established auxiliary positions along the outer limits of the ranch. Their efforts, though less coordinated than those of the battle-hardened veterans, were fueled by an authentic passion for preserving the legacy of the land. These citizens, whose faces bore the marks of a simple life, now became integral to a tapestry of resistance that spanned generations. As the second assault gradually waned, the renegade forces were forced to reassess their tactics. Their retreat was marked by moments of hesitation and disarray, a stark contrast to the initial bravado with which they had launched their offensive. The defenders, though weary from the sustained engagement, maintained a relentless vigilance, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of renewed aggression. In the command center, a heavy silence fell as the gravity of the night's unfolding events was fully absorbed. Every veteran present felt the weight of history upon their shoulders, the knowledge that this night would be etched into the annals of their collective memory as a testament to the unyielding spirit of survival and resistance. Within the flickering glow of the makeshift command center, Evelyn Mercer allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. Though her body ached with the burden of years and the strain of combat, her heart remained indomitable. The image of her long-ago comrades, the brothers and sisters in arms who had shared the crucible of war, flashed vividly before her eyes, mingling with the present struggle in a vivid tapestry of courage and sacrifice. In that fleeting instant, the ranch transformed from a mere collection of buildings and fields into a living monument to a lifetime of perseverance, a symbol of the enduring power of honor and unity. As the night advanced toward its darkest hours, the defenders began to gain the upper hand. The renegades, battered by the unexpected resilience of a community bound by shared purpose and hardened by decades of lived experience, retreated further into the surrounding wilderness. Their attempts to regroup and launch a final, desperate offensive were met with a steadfast resistance that left little room for the chaos they had so recklessly sought to impose. The rhythmic sounds of retreat, the clatter of wheels on gravel and the distant echo of disorganized commands, were in stark contrast to the measured, deliberate cadence of the defenders who remained steadfastly at their posts. In the aftermath of the renewed onslaught, as silence slowly reclaimed the fields of Sundance Ridge, a sense of grim relief began to settle over the assemblage. The defenders, though physically and emotionally drained, maintained an air of resolute determination. They had weathered the storm of the night's attacks, not without scars, but with their dignity intact. The quiet, almost imperceptible shifting of the wind seemed to carry away the remnants of conflict, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with the promise that the legacy of this land would endure despite the incursions of those who sought to undermine it. In the gentle glow of pre-dawn, as the horizon began to hint at the promise of a new day, the veterans and citizens of Sundance Ridge took stock of the night's bitter conflict. The battered barricades, the scattered remnants of renegade equipment, and the silent testimonies of valor etched into the very earth all spoke of a struggle that was as much about reclaiming dignity as it was about defending territory. Evelyn Mercer, standing at the center of this tableau of survival, embodied the essence of a life dedicated to service, sacrifice, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. Her eyes, though tired, shone with the same fierce determination that had carried her through wars and whispered promises of hope in the darkest hours. As the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, casting a gentle light upon the ravaged yet resilient landscape of Sundance Ridge, the defenders began to reorganize and tend to their wounds, both physical and emotional. In the quiet aftermath, there was a collective understanding that this night, with all its violence and valor, was only the beginning of a longer struggle. The renegade forces might retreat into the shadows for now, but the war for the soul of the land was far from over. Yet, in that still, tender moment between night and day, there was an unmistakable sense of unity and resolve, a shared commitment to rebuild, to honor the sacrifices made, and to stand guard over the legacy of a community that refused to be broken. Thus, as the light of morning steadily warmed the dew-kissed fields, the defenders of Sundance Ridge prepared to face whatever challenges the coming day might bring. In their eyes burned the embers of unyielding courage, a flame that had been nurtured by decades of struggle and would continue to guide them through the uncertainties of the future. And in the heart of it all stood Evelyn Mercer, a 90-year-old veteran whose life, marked by the scars of distant wars and the quiet dignity of rural perseverance, now served as a beacon for all who believed in the timeless power of honor, unity, and the enduring resilience of the human spirit. As the soft glow of early morning light cascaded over the battered yet unbowed landscape of Sundance Ridge, a new phase of the struggle began to take shape. The remnants of the night's fierce engagement still lingered in the air, a mixture of spent ammunition, scorched earth, and the palpable determination of a community that had survived the storm. In the fragile calm of dawn, the defenders, led by the indomitable spirit of Evelyn Mercer, moved with deliberate purpose to assess the damage and fortify their position against the uncertainties that lay ahead. The night had left its scars upon the ranch, shattered fence posts, dented machinery, and signs of hastily repelled intrusions etched into every surface. Yet, even in the aftermath, the air was charged with a resolute energy. Veterans who had weathered decades of conflict and hardship gathered around makeshift medic stations, tending to bruises, lacerations, and the invisible wounds born from a night of unrelenting combat. Amid the soft clamor of hushed voices and the steady rhythm of healing, Evelyn's presence radiated calm assurance. Though her frame bore the weight of 90 years, her gaze remained as sharp as it had been in the heat of battle, scanning each corner of the homestead with a measured blend of scrutiny and compassion. In the hours following the night's ordeal, the community of Sundance Ridge began to rally anew. The local townsfolk, farmers, shopkeepers, and elders who had thrown their lot in with the defenders, set about the painstaking task of restoring order to the ravaged grounds. They repaired broken boards, cleared debris from the once pristine driveways, and reassembled the battered barricades with a mixture of traditional know-how and the hard-earned pragmatism of those who had lived through too many storms. Every repaired plank and reassembled fence was more than a physical act of restoration, it was an affirmation that the spirit of the land, and the legacy of its keeper, could never be wholly subdued. Meanwhile, within the makeshift command center that had served as the nerve center for the night's resistance, Evelyn and her closest lieutenants convened to review the events with the meticulous care of seasoned tacticians. The maps that had been furiously annotated hours before were now spread open under the dim light of a single lamp, their markings redrawn to reflect the evolving contours of the conflict. With calm deliberation, they analyzed the movements of the renegade forces, tracking not only the initial incursions but also the subtle hints of a larger, more coordinated threat that might be looming on the horizon. The battle lines, it seemed, were not merely drawn on the physical terrain but were woven into the very fabric of the community's existence. In a quiet corner of the main barn, where dust motes danced in the slivers of morning light, a group of younger defenders gathered around an old radio set. Their eyes were filled with both the raw excitement of impending action and the sober awareness of the cost that came with every fight. They intercepted faint transmissions, hushed and fragmented, suggesting that the renegade forces were not done, that reinforcements might be converging from distant roads and uncharted byways. The whispers on the air carried the unmistakable cadence of organized opposition, a threat that was evolving, adapting, and perhaps even preparing for a counteroffensive that could extend beyond the boundaries of the ranch. The news was sobering, yet it further cemented the resolve of those who had already given so much in defense of their home. Evelyn, standing by a weathered window that overlooked the fields, allowed her mind to wander for a moment to the days when she had led missions deep into hostile territory, days when every decision could mean the difference between survival and oblivion. The memories were a mosaic of loss and triumph, and now, in this quieter battle against modern marauders, they served as both a guide and an inspiration. The legacy of her service in Vietnam, the camaraderie of countless fallen and surviving comrades, and the enduring lessons of resilience were all etched into her very being. It was as though the echoes of past conflicts lent her an almost supernatural foresight, enabling her to sense the subtle tremors of change even before they fully manifested in the present. Outside, the ranch's perimeter was being systematically secured by a well-organized cadre of defenders. They had fashioned new lookout posts atop restored silos and reinforced vulnerable entry points with salvaged metal and repurposed farm implements. Every shift of a headlamp, every exchanged nod, carried with it the weight of shared purpose. The community, though scarred by the night's violence, was united by a common conviction that the legacy of Sundance Ridge was worth every sacrifice. The resolute expressions on the faces of the veterans, their hands calloused by decades of hard labor and conflict alike, spoke volumes of a bond that transcended age and circumstance, a bond that was forged in the crucible of war and now tempered by the steady determination to protect a cherished way of life. As the morning matured into a clear, resolute day, the defenders began to sense a shift in the balance of power. While the renegade forces had retreated into the enveloping shadows of distant woodlands after their failed assault, there remained an undercurrent of restless activity on the fringes of the community. Scattered patrols of enemy scouts were spotted along the far roads, their movements cautious yet persistent, as if they were waiting for a moment of vulnerability to strike again. The veterans, having learned well from the night's bitter lessons, adjusted their tactics accordingly, establishing a network of interconnected observation points that spanned the vast reaches of the surrounding countryside. In the midst of this renewed vigilance, word of the conflict had begun to spread to neighboring towns, drawing sympathetic responses from communities that had long been wary of the encroaching tide of lawlessness. A few trusted messengers, riding weathered pickup trucks and battered motorcycles, began to deliver discreet signals of support. They brought news that reinforcements might soon arrive, veterans from nearby regions who had heard of Sundance Ridge's plight and were eager to join the defense. Though their arrival was uncertain and the timing unpredictable, the very prospect of additional allies kindled a spark of hope among the defenders. It was a reminder that in the face of adversity, unity was the strongest shield of all. Within the command center, the air was thick with both strategy and a quiet optimism that belied the gravity of the situation. The elders among the group recounted stories of past struggles, of battles fought in far-off lands and conflicts won against overwhelming odds, each tale serving as a lesson in perseverance. Their voices, steady and measured, wove together a tapestry of memory and strategy, creating an unspoken creed that bound the defenders in solidarity. In that sacred circle of shared experience, every whispered word was imbued with the wisdom of a lifetime dedicated to sacrifice and service. As the day wore on, the natural rhythms of the land began to assert themselves once more. The wind, which had howled in the darkness of night, now carried with it a gentle, reassuring cadence that mingled with the murmurs of the survivors. The fields, recovering from the night's upheaval, seemed to exhale in quiet relief as cattle returned to their grazing and birds resumed their songs among the newly mended trees. The juxtaposition of renewal and vigilant readiness encapsulated the essence of Sundance Ridge, a place where the scars of past conflict were slowly healed by the unyielding pulse of life and the promise of another day. In the meantime, Evelyn continued her solitary patrol along the outer limits of her land. With a steady gait and eyes that missed nothing, she moved among the reinvigorated barricades and newly established lookouts, her presence a constant reminder of the legacy that had shaped the community. Every step she took was a silent vow, a promise that no matter how dark the days might become, the spirit of Sundance Ridge would endure. Her thoughts drifted momentarily to the fallen members of her circle, those whose sacrifices had etched indelible marks upon her heart. Their memory was a beacon, guiding her through the murky uncertainties of the present, and fueling her determination to forge ahead even in the face of relentless adversity. As midday approached and the sun climbed high into a cerulean sky, an uneasy stillness settled over the ranch. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next act in a drama that had stretched across decades and continents. In this fragile lull, every sound, the distant hum of an engine, the soft rustle of leaves, even the subtle creak of an old wooden beam, seemed magnified, carrying with it the latent promise of impending conflict. Yet, amidst this tension, there was also the unmistakable scent of resolve, of a community that had found strength in unity and clarity in purpose. The defenders knew that the calm was temporary, a prelude to a phase in which the renegade forces would undoubtedly regroup and test their strategies anew. In hushed tones and careful glances, plans were redrawn and contingencies discussed. There was talk of establishing a network of secure communication lines that would allow for faster mobilization should the enemy dare to press their advantage again. In corners of the command center, where light and shadow played upon maps and faded photographs, the seeds of future countermeasures were sown, each idea a reflection of the ingenuity born of necessity, and the unyielding belief that the legacy of Sundance Ridge was not forfeit. The distant sound of approaching vehicles, faint at first but growing steadily louder, signaled that the day's challenges were far from over. Eyes sharpened and hearts steeled. The veterans readied themselves for the possibility that this might be the moment when the renegade forces, bolstered by the intelligence gathered from earlier assaults, would make a renewed push against their defenses. In the delicate interplay of strategy and instinct, every moment became a calculated risk, every breath a measured anticipation of what might come next. In the midst of this intricate dance between vigilance and hope, Evelyn Mercer remained the unwavering pillar around which the community's resolve coalesced. Her presence, a living chronicle of battles past and victories hard-earned, lent a quiet gravity to every decision and every action taken on that sunlit day. It was clear to all who stood on the battered soil of Sundance Ridge that the struggle for the soul of their home was far from a solitary endeavor, it was a collective journey marked by resilience, camaraderie, and an unbreakable bond forged in the crucible of shared adversity. Thus, as the vehicles neared and the first tentative signals of another potential assault rippled through the air, the defenders of Sundance Ridge braced themselves for the next chapter of their relentless struggle. With each passing moment, the legacy of the past was interwoven with the promise of a future that, while uncertain, was fiercely guarded by the hearts and souls of those who had vowed to stand as sentinels over the land they loved. In that charged atmosphere of renewal and anticipation, every soul present reaffirmed an unspoken truth, that even as the shadows of conflict loomed large, the spirit of unity and the enduring legacy of honor would forever light the way forward. As the sun reached its zenith over the rugged highlands surrounding Sundance Ridge, a palpable shift began to stir in the air, a quiet portent of a new chapter in the ongoing conflict. The defenders, having labored through a relentless night and a day filled with vigilant repair and renewed fortification, now stood at the threshold of a confrontation that promised to test every ounce of their collective resolve. The once tranquil morning, now laden with the weight of anticipation, was permeated by the steady rhythm of duty and the unspoken memory of battles past. In the wake of the night's chaotic clashes, the ranch had transformed into a tableau of scarred beauty, weathered fences mended with determined hands, battered vehicles repurposed as barricades, and the silent, stoic presence of structures that had borne witness to decades of hardship and hope. Evelyn Mercer, her eyes still as sharp as the day she first learned to read the language of conflict, moved among these relics of survival with a measured grace. Though her body had long accepted the burdens of age, her spirit remained a fire unextinguished, a flame born of Vietnam jungles and hardened on the fields of countless rural skirmishes. Throughout the day, the defenders had methodically secured every accessible vantage point along the perimeter. Makeshift lookout posts were manned by veterans whose experienced eyes scanned the horizon for any signs of renewed aggression. In the distance, along the winding back roads that threaded through dense stands of aspen and pine, hints of movement were discerned, subtle disturbances in the natural cadence of the land that spoke of forces gathering anew. The air, which had once been still and expectant, now vibrated with the low murmur of coordinated preparations and hushed exchanges among the sentinels of Sundance Ridge. At the heart of the homestead, within the improvised command center that had become a crucible of strategy and memory, Evelyn and her lieutenants pored over freshly updated maps and intercepted signals. They exchanged glances filled with unyielding determination, each aware that the enemy was not only regrouping but evolving in their tactics. Rumors had filtered in through the network of trusted couriers, veterans from distant counties, resilient souls who had taken up arms in solidarity, were en route to bolster the defenses. Their promised arrival, though uncertain in timing, was a beacon of hope amid the lingering threat. The prospect of reinforcements, combined with the unbreakable bond of shared experience, reinvigorated the weary but resolute hearts of those gathered. On the outskirts of the fortified ranch, the renegade forces were not idle. They were reassembling in the dense scrub along a rugged trail leading to a series of abandoned silos, their temporary haven from the earlier repulse. The hardened militants, faces masked with the arrogance of youth and the desperation of outcasts, reconfigured their formation in the shadowed recesses of a forgotten industrial district beyond the ridge. Their leader, a gaunt man known only as Cutter, a moniker whispered in fear and defiance, stared into the distance, his eyes reflecting both the embers of past triumphs and the cold calculation of a man who sought to reclaim lost territory. The renegades were recalibrating their approach, recognizing that brute force alone would no longer suffice against an enemy whose resolve was as deep-rooted as the land itself. As the afternoon waned into a heavy, expectant silence, the defenders sensed the encroaching storm. The once familiar sounds of rustling wildlife and the gentle hum of nature were now overlaid with an undercurrent of tension, a staccato beat of distant engines, the faint echo of boot falls on gravel, and the intermittent clink of metal against metal. Each of these sounds resonated with the memory of conflict, a reminder that the peace of Sundance Ridge was a fragile truce held in place by unyielding determination. Evelyn, standing atop a gently sloping rise near the eastern boundary of the property, surveyed the land with the discerning gaze of one who had witnessed both the horrors of war and the quiet triumphs of survival. The wind, cool and steady against her weathered skin, carried with it the mingled sense of pine resin and the earth freshly turned, a sensory reminder of both nature's relentless cycle of decay and renewal. It was here, on this ridge overlooking a labyrinth of fields and scrubland, that she paused to reflect on the fragile equilibrium between order and chaos. Every scar on the landscape, every repaired fence and reassembled barricade, was a testament to the enduring legacy of a community that had fought tooth and nail for every inch of its existence. As if in response to her silent contemplation, a sharp burst of static crackled through the radio in the command center, drawing immediate attention. A voice, tinged with urgency and tempered by the fatigue of endless nights, relayed critical intelligence. The renegade forces were mobilizing a new assault, this time with a ferocity born of desperation. The message was succinct, a report of a sizable contingent of enemy fighters advancing along a narrow corridor that wound its way toward the southern access road. There was no time for hesitation, every moment now carried the potential for decisive action. Within seconds, the command center erupted into a flurry of orchestrated activity. Veteran operators relayed orders with the calm efficiency of a well-rehearsed drill. Tactical adjustments were swiftly made, alternate firing positions were designated, and additional sentries were dispatched to cover blind spots previously thought secure. The atmosphere, though still imbued with the lingering exhaustion of earlier combat, now crackled with the heightened awareness of imminent confrontation. The unity among the defenders was palpable, a seamless blend of individual valor and collective purpose that transcended the limitations of age and circumstance. In the dimming light of late afternoon, as the sky burned with the deep hues of approaching dusk, the first outlines of the new enemy formation emerged against the horizon. Their approach was methodical, as if every step was measured against a grim calculus of conquest. Cutter's renegade band advanced with a resolve that belied their recent setbacks, their vehicles cutting across the rugged terrain with a determined clamor. The defenders of Sundance Ridge, arrayed in positions that had been painstakingly secured over the course of the day, braced themselves for the renewed assault. The distant hum of engines grew louder, punctuating the silence with the drumbeat of impending conflict. On a narrow ridge overlooking the southern access road, a group of defenders, young and old alike, moved into position. Their movements were fluid, born of years of rehearsed routines in the crucible of real battle. Amid the ranks, a weathered radio operator exchanged terse instructions with a scout, both of them aware that the coming moments would be etched into the collective memory of the community. In the background, the old farmhouse, with its peeling paint and sturdy construction, stood as a silent monument to generations of struggle and resilience, a reminder that every stone, every creaking board, had witnessed the triumphs and tragedies of a long and storied past. As the renegade forces drew ever nearer, the defenders' preparations reached a fever pitch. Each makeshift barricade, each repurposed piece of old machinery, became a symbol of the unyielding resistance that defined Sundance Ridge. In the command center, the air was thick with the weight of anticipation. Maps were rechecked, routes verified, and the positions of every sentry confirmed. Evelyn Mercer, ever the steadfast matriarch of this embattled sanctuary, allowed herself a brief, measured smile, a glimmer of defiant hope in the face of overwhelming odds. Her eyes, still bright with the fire of past glories, flickered with the knowledge that every sacrifice, every memory of war and peace alike, had led to this moment. The renegade forces, now clearly visible in the fading light, began to deploy in a formation that suggested both tactical innovation and raw determination. Cutter, with a gaze that betrayed neither fear nor uncertainty, directed his men to split into two groups, one to engage directly with the fortified southern positions and the other to flank the defenders through a narrow, wooded corridor. This dual-pronged strategy, designed to overwhelm the defenders through the element of surprise, was met with immediate countermeasures. The veterans, drawing upon the lessons of decades past, anticipated the maneuver. In unspoken coordination, flares were launched to signal the anticipated flanking movement, and a contingent of defenders repositioned themselves along the predicted path of the enemy's advance. In that charged moment, the fields of Sundance Ridge became a stage for a confrontation that was as much a battle of wits as it was of weapons. The natural elements, the rustling of aspen leaves, the shifting shadows of late afternoon, and the steady descent of twilight, merged with the human elements of determination, strategy, and sacrifice. Every heartbeat, every whispered command, and every echo of gunfire resonated with the indomitable spirit of a community that had weathered more than its share of storms. As dusk deepened into twilight, the clash erupted in a burst of fierce intensity. The defenders, long prepared for this moment, met the onslaught with a series of well-coordinated responses. The southern barricades, manned by those who had stood resolute through earlier skirmishes, were assailed by the enemy with a barrage of makeshift projectiles and desperate charges. In response, the defenders unleashed controlled volleys that sent shockwaves through the advancing ranks, each shot a measured assertion of the unyielding right to protect what was sacred. Amid the chaos of combat, the narrative of Sundance Ridge, woven through decades of conflict, sacrifice, and hope, found new expression. The community fought not merely for the physical boundaries of their land but for the intangible legacy of honor, unity, and the enduring spirit of those who had borne the burdens of war and time. Evelyn Mercer, in the midst of the unfolding melee, remained a steadfast figure of calm authority. Even as the battle swirled around her like a maelstrom of noise and fury, her presence lent a weight of assurance that echoed far beyond the immediate struggle, a living testament to the belief that the past, with all its scars and triumphs, could light the way forward even in the darkest of hours. Thus, as the twilight deepened and the first stars began to pierce the darkening sky, the defenders of Sundance Ridge held their ground. In that suspended moment between chaos and order, every soul present recognized that the fight was not simply a battle for territory, it was a crucible that would define the future of their community. A test of whether the legacy of sacrifice and honor could prevail over the relentless tides of aggression. With hearts fortified by shared memories and eyes fixed on the horizon, they braced themselves for the uncertain path ahead, determined that no matter what the night might bring, the spirit of Sundance Ridge would endure. As the echoes of the renewed clash receded into the cool embrace of night, the defenders of Sundance Ridge found themselves entrenched in a precarious lull, a fragile interlude that allowed them to catch their breath even as the threat of renewed violence loomed on the horizon. In the dim luminescence cast by scattered flares and the residual glow of distant fires, every detail of the battlefield took on an almost mythic quality. Shadows danced across the weathered facades of barns and silos, and every face bore the unmistakable marks of fatigue and determination. It was during this tense interval that Evelyn Mercer, the indomitable 90-year-old matriarch whose life had been a tapestry of distant wars and hard-won victories on her land, moved with a deliberate serenity through the makeshift encampment. The battered command center, now a temporary nerve hub built around reassembled maps, digital displays, and analog radios, hummed with the low murmur of strategy in hushed conversation. Veterans of countless battles, some who had seen the blood of jungles and deserts long faded into memory, gathered in small clusters, their voices a soft, resolute cadence that spoke of a lifetime dedicated to the cause of defending what was sacred. They reviewed recent events with a mix of solemnity and unwavering resolve, recalculating their positions in light of the intelligence that the renegade forces were not yet finished. Their measured discussion was punctuated by brief nods and the scratching of pens against paper, each symbol and coordinate on the maps representing a line of defense drawn from hard-earned experience. Outside, the physical remnants of the conflict bore witness to the night's ferocity. Trenches had been dug in the soft earth, and barricades, once hastily constructed, now stood as resolute bulwarks reinforced with salvaged scrap metal and repurposed farming equipment. The fields, once awash with the muted colors of a rural dawn, were now marked by the scars of conflict, smudged tracks in the dust, splintered wood, and patches of scorched ground that testified to the indiscriminate violence of the earlier assaults. Yet, amidst the destruction, signs of tenacious life persevered, a stubborn wildflower pushing its way through cracked earth, the low murmur of cattle returning to their pens, and the determined voices of the townsfolk who labored to mend the physical and emotional wounds inflicted by the night's violence. Evelyn, surveying the scene from a modest observation post near a restored silo, allowed her mind to wander momentarily back to a time when the world was a very different place. In the quiet of her recollection, the distant thunder of helicopter rotors and the din of artillery fire blended with the soft cadence of nature, a juxtaposition of chaos and calm that had defined the many chapters of her life. The memories of Vietnam, with its dense foliage, its oppressive heat, and the relentless pressure of survival, intermingled with the stark, open plains of her current domain. Though the battleground had changed, the essence of combat, the struggle to protect what one holds dear, remained the same. And in that reflection, Evelyn found a renewed reservoir of strength that seemed to draw not only from her own storied past but also from the collective spirit of every soul gathered on the land. Within the command center, strategic plans were evolving as swiftly as the enemy's movements. Messages intercepted on the radio hinted that the renegade forces, now regrouping in the shadowed corridors of a nearby industrial complex, were preparing to launch a coordinated counteroffensive. The intelligence was fragmented, a series of sporadic transmissions, snippets of conversation lost in static, but it painted a picture of an enemy that was both cunning and desperate. The veterans, drawing upon decades of collective military acumen, debated possible courses of action. Some advocated for a bold preemptive maneuver, a decisive strike aimed at disrupting the enemy's assembly point before they could fully coalesce. Others counseled caution, emphasizing the need to conserve their limited resources and avoid overextension in a conflict that, despite its sporadic outbursts, threatened to escalate into an all-out war. In this crucible of decision-making, Evelyn's voice emerged as a quiet, unifying force. Though she rarely spoke above a measured murmur, her words carried the gravitas of a life steeped in sacrifice and unyielding duty. She reminded her comrades that every inch of Sundance Ridge had been won through blood, sweat, and an enduring commitment to justice, a legacy that must not be compromised by rash action. Her measured perspective, tempered by the weight of years and the scars of battles fought in far-off lands, lent clarity to the deliberations. The veterans listened intently, each one recognizing that the wisdom born of experience was the most potent weapon in their arsenal. Outside the safety of the fortified compound, the renegade forces began to stir anew. Under the shroud of darkness, the enemy's movements were a study in calculated stealth, a series of deliberate, measured steps that hinted at a renewed assault. Their leader, Cutter, whose cold, calculating demeanor had become a symbol of defiance among his followers, was reportedly consolidating his forces for a final, sweeping maneuver that would target the most vulnerable points of the defense. The intelligence reports, though tinged with uncertainty, spoke of reinforcements arriving from distant outposts, adding weight to the enemy's resolve. And while the defenders braced for another confrontation, there was also an undercurrent of resolve to seize the initiative rather than merely react. In the soft, pre-dawn hours when the sky was a canvas of deep indigo slowly yielding to the promise of light, the community of Sundance Ridge rallied in a way that was both spontaneous and meticulously orchestrated. Small groups of local volunteers, farmers, retired mechanics, and shopkeepers whose lives had been quietly intertwined with the rhythm of the land, joined forces with the veteran sentinels. They were united by a common purpose, the defense of a way of life that had weathered many storms. Their arrival, heralded by the rumble of pickup trucks and the clattering of motorcycle engines, infused the beleaguered defenders with fresh hope and a renewed sense of collective purpose. As dawn broke in earnest, the interplay of natural light and human endeavor took on an almost cinematic quality. The first beams of sunlight illuminated the battle-worn barricades and lent a gentle glow to the determined faces of those who had gathered to stand against the forces of chaos. The natural world, ever resilient, seemed to participate in this unfolding drama, a chorus of birds lifted into the sky, their calls a poignant reminder of life's persistent beauty even in the midst of strife. The defenders, now gathered in renewed strength, reconfigured their positions with the careful precision of a chess master adjusting his pieces before the next move, a move that could determine the future of their beloved home. Evelyn Mercer, ever the guardian of Sundance Ridge, continued to move through the ranks with the unhurried assurance of one who had seen the worst that life could offer and yet had emerged with an undiminished sense of purpose. Her eyes, a repository of hard-won wisdom, tracked the movements of both friend and foe. In her heart, there was the quiet knowledge that every sacrifice, every loss, and every fleeting moment of despair had only served to strengthen the bond between the land and its people. It was this bond, a fusion of shared history, deep-rooted loyalty, and an unbreakable will to persevere, that would ultimately tip the scales in their favor. As the day advanced, the murmurs of imminent danger were replaced by a resolute calm. The renegade forces, their strategy now more refined and their numbers bolstered by fresh recruits, appeared poised to strike again. Their anticipated assault would likely be a culmination of days of careful planning, a final bid to break the defenders' spirit by overwhelming their positions with sheer force and unbridled aggression. Yet, the defenders of Sundance Ridge, seasoned by years of hardship and driven by the clarity of purpose that had been honed in the crucible of conflict, were ready to meet this challenge head-on. In the quiet before what promised to be another fierce confrontation, every member of the assembled force took a moment to reflect on the stakes of the struggle. The defense of Sundance Ridge was more than a mere tactical contest, it was a battle for the very soul of the community, a testament to the enduring power of unity, honor, and the willingness to fight for a future free of tyranny and lawlessness. In that reflective stillness, the legacy of Evelyn Mercer and her compatriots shone as a beacon of hope, a light that would guide them through the encroaching darkness and inspire the generations that would follow. Thus, as the defenders braced themselves for the next onslaught, the air at Sundance Ridge was filled with the steady pulse of determination. The stage was set for a renewed clash, a struggle that would once again test the mettle of those who had dedicated their lives to preserving the sanctity of their home. Every heart beat in unison with the rhythm of the land, every hand gripped a tool or weapon with the firm resolve of those who had no choice but to stand firm. And in the center of it all, Evelyn Mercer, ever steadfast, ever vigilant, stood as the living embodiment of a legacy that refused to yield, a legacy that would endure no matter the cost. As the day pressed on and the defenders of Sundance Ridge maintained their vigilant watch, the air grew thick with the promise of imminent conflict, a storm of uncertainty that loomed over the scarred landscape like a dark omen. In the midst of this tense calm, the community found itself poised on the razor's edge between renewal and devastation. Every heartbeat, every measured breath taken by the stalwart defenders, resonated with the unspoken understanding that the legacy of their home was at stake. The battered structures of the ranch, barns, silos, and weathered fences, stood as mute witnesses to decades of sacrifice, resilience, and unyielding determination, their very existence a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who had come before. Evelyn Mercer, the venerable guardian of Sundance Ridge, moved among her comrades with a deliberate and unhurried grace. Despite the physical toll of 90 years, her mind was as sharp as ever, recalling the long, arduous nights spent on distant battlefields and the bitter lessons learned in the jungles of Vietnam. The memories of explosive engagements and close calls had become etched into her very being, each scar on her weathered face a silent chronicle of survival. Now, as she surveyed the shifting dynamics of the day, those memories merged with the present to forge an ironclad resolve. Her eyes, clear and determined beneath thick brows, darted from one strategic position to another as she contemplated the enemy's possible maneuvers and the best ways to reinforce vulnerable spots along the perimeter. The renegade forces, led by the enigmatic Cutter, had not given up their assault without a fight. Even as they gathered in the shadowed recesses beyond the ridge, their presence was palpable, an ever-present threat in the hushed whispers of the wind and the occasional clatter of loose gravel under heavy boots. Intelligence gathered by the vigilant sentries revealed that Cutter was orchestrating a final, massive push to overwhelm the defenders' carefully arranged positions. The enemy's new plan, hinted at through fragmented radio transmissions and furtive observations by seasoned scouts, promised a relentless, multi-pronged offensive aimed at exploiting every chink in the armor of Sundance Ridge's defenses. Amid the renewed tension, the veterans and local volunteers rallied with an energy that belied their age and weariness. The group, composed of battle-hardened souls and everyday citizens alike, moved with a synchrony that was reminiscent of military precision honed over years of coordinated struggle. Makeshift barricades were swiftly reinforced with salvaged metal from abandoned tractors and repurposed farm equipment. In the open fields, where the dust from recent skirmishes still mingled with the early morning light, workers labored to mend the splintered fence lines that had once delineated the borders of their sanctuary. Every repaired board and resecured latch was not just a physical restoration, but a symbolic reaffirmation of their unyielding commitment to protect their way of life. Within the command center, a room that had become both a war room and a repository of collective memory, the atmosphere was charged with both urgency and measured resolve. Maps, now annotated with fresh intelligence and strategic insights, lay spread out on a large, scarred wooden table. Veterans, their voices low and steady, deliberated over the enemy's likely routes of approach. Their discussion was interspersed with brief, heavy moments of silence as each weighed the risks and consequences of potential actions. In that hallowed space, where the air was thick with the weight of history and the promise of future battles, Evelyn's presence served as an anchor. Her soft yet commanding voice offered guidance born of experience, the necessity to hold fast, to adapt swiftly, and to never lose sight of the underlying principle that had always driven them, the sacred duty to safeguard their home and the legacy of countless sacrifices. Outside, the renegade forces began their coordinated advance. In a series of deliberate, almost ritualistic movements, groups of enemy combatants emerged from the cover of the surrounding woodland and industrial remnants. Their vehicles, once symbols of rebellious defiance, now rumbled steadily along the access roads in a display of force that left no doubt as to their intentions. The enemy's formations, meticulously arranged and moving in synchrony, cut through the dusty air as they converged on the southern and western flanks of the ranch. Their leader, Cutter, was seen at the forefront, a gaunt, resolute figure whose eyes burned with an unyielding desire to reclaim what he believed was his. Every inch of their approach was a calculated challenge, a deliberate provocation meant to test the defenders' mettle and disrupt the fragile equilibrium that had been painstakingly maintained. In response, the defenders enacted their contingency plans with precision. Signal flares arced gracefully into the sky, their brief, vivid bursts of light marking the enemy's advance and coordinating the repositioning of key defensive assets. Veterans manned newly fortified observation posts along the ridge, their binoculars trained on the advancing formations as they communicated silently through well-rehearsed signals. A chorus of measured commands echoed softly in the command center as positions were adjusted, and the remaining reserves were called to bear. Each adjustment was a blend of old-school tactical acumen and the intuitive understanding that had been cultivated over a lifetime of conflict. The collective energy in the room was electric, a blend of steely resolve and a quiet, desperate hope that they could once again turn the tide. In the midst of this rapidly evolving tableau, the natural world maintained its own measured cadence. The rustle of wind through the tall grasses, the low murmur of a nearby creek, and even the distant call of a lone bird provided a stark counterpoint to the human drama unfolding on the field. These elements of nature, seemingly indifferent to the conflict, served as a reminder of the enduring cycle of life and renewal. For the defenders, this was both a source of comfort and a poignant symbol. No matter how fierce the battle, the earth would continue its slow, inevitable process of healing and growth. As the confrontation reached its crescendo, the first salvo of the renewed offensive was unleashed. A barrage of improvised projectiles arced across the sky, their trajectory illuminated briefly by flashes of light and the desperate shouts of enemy fighters. The defenders responded with disciplined volleys from their repurposed weapons, tools honed into instruments of resistance by decades of practice. The clash of metal on metal, the echo of distant explosions, and the rhythmic cadence of gunfire intermingled into a chaotic symphony that reverberated through the open expanse of the ranch. Every explosion, every burst of gunfire, punctuated the unyielding rhythm of battle, as if the very land itself were bearing witness to a struggle that transcended the immediate conflict. At the center of this maelstrom stood Evelyn Mercer, her presence as constant and unyielding as the ancient rocks that bordered the property. With a gaze that could silence a room and hands that had long since forgotten the tremors of fear, she surveyed the battlefield with a quiet dignity. The memories of far-off battlefields and hard-fought victories coalesced within her mind, each one a reminder that true strength was measured not by physical might alone, but by the unbreakable will to stand against tyranny. Even as chaos swirled around her, her voice, though low, carried a weight that stilled the commotion for a moment, infusing her comrades with a renewed sense of purpose. The renewed assault by the renegade forces was relentless, designed to exploit every possible weakness in the defenders' lines. Cutter's men pressed forward in carefully orchestrated waves, their movements synchronized to create openings and force the defenders into a state of perpetual reaction. Yet, every advance was met with a countermeasure that had been meticulously planned in the quiet hours of strategy. The defenders, drawing upon their collective reservoir of courage and tactical insight, shifted their positions fluidly. A flank here was sealed off with a well-timed volley, a gap there closed with the rapid repositioning of a unit that had long ago learned the art of anticipation. In the chaos of battle, there were moments of quiet heroism that shone through the din. A young volunteer, whose face was etched with both determination and the fresh scars of combat, manned a critical outpost on the western front, his eyes alight with the fire of defiance. Nearby, a seasoned veteran, his hands steady despite the rigors of age, repurposed a rusted farming implement into a makeshift shield, his actions embodying the resourcefulness that had become the hallmark of Sundance Ridge's defenders. Their individual acts of bravery, though fleeting in the midst of the larger conflict, coalesced into a larger tapestry of collective resistance, a vivid demonstration that every soul present was willing to stake everything on the defense of their cherished home. As the battle raged on, the interplay between light and shadow became ever more pronounced. The rising sun began to cast long, dramatic rays over the battered landscape, illuminating scenes of valor and sacrifice with a transient, almost ethereal glow. In those brief moments of clarity, the faces of the defenders, smudged with the grit of battle and lined with the wisdom of a lifetime, reflected an unspoken promise that the legacy of Sundance Ridge would endure, no matter the cost. Every cry, every desperate rally, was a reaffirmation of the belief that honor and unity could overcome even the darkest of adversities. Within the command center, as the renewed offensive intensified, Evelyn Mercer and her lieutenants refined their strategies with a clarity that only experience could bestow. They considered every possibility, every potential maneuver of the enemy, and adjusted their defenses with the precision of chess masters. The room pulsed with a quiet intensity, a blend of tension, hope, and an almost sacred determination to see the fight through to its inevitable conclusion. There was no room for error. Every decision had to be measured against the backdrop of countless sacrifices that had paved the way for this moment. And so, as the battle entered a critical phase, the defenders of Sundance Ridge met the enemy with an unyielding force of will. The cacophony of combat, the staccato bursts of gunfire, the clashing of improvised weapons, the harsh cries of defiance, melded into a single, relentless rhythm that resonated through the heart of the community. In that grand, tumultuous moment, the legacy of a 90-year-old veteran, the spirit of a tightly knit band of warriors, and the enduring bond of a community united against overwhelming odds stood as an unassailable bulwark against the forces of chaos. The struggle for Sundance Ridge had reached a fever pitch, a testament to the belief that no matter how fierce the storm, the light of honor and unity would persist. Every soul on that battered field knew that the coming moments would define not only the outcome of the battle but the future of their way of life. With the rising sun heralding a new day, the defenders prepared to press forward, their hearts emboldened by the unyielding spirit of those who had fought before them and the promise that their legacy, however hard fought, would shine like a beacon in the endless horizon of time. As the first light of dawn merged with the lingering hues of twilight, a resolute quiet fell over the battered fields of Sundance Ridge, a silence heavy with both the cost of conflict and the promise of renewal. The air, still carrying the faint scent of gunpowder and scorched earth from the previous night's tumult, now mingled with the fresh aroma of dew and rejuvenated soil. In this final stretch of the struggle, every face on the field bore the imprint of exhaustion and unyielding determination, a tapestry woven from decades of sacrifice, valor, and the shared heartbeat of a community that refused to be defeated. The renewed offensive had ebbed into a climactic standoff, where the renegade forces, led by Cutter, whose icy eyes still burned with a stubborn desire to reclaim a semblance of lost dominance, found themselves locked in a battle of attrition against defenders whose every breath testified to a lifetime of resilience. The enemy's ranks, though bolstered by fresh recruits from distant outposts, now confronted a wall of steadfast resolve. At the center of this struggle stood Evelyn Mercer, her presence a constant beacon amid the chaos, as if the very spirit of every battle fought before lent her an aura of invincibility. Despite the weight of 90 years, every measured step she took along the line of defense radiated the wisdom and determination honed over long-ago days in distant, perilous lands. Across the scarred expanse of Sundance Ridge, the natural world bore silent witness to the final chapters of this conflict. The once quiet fields, still marked by deep furrows of recent combat, now stirred with tentative signs of rebirth. Wildflowers began to reclaim the broken earth and the gentle murmur of a nearby creek mingled with the soft sighs of those who had fought so fiercely. In the interplay of light and shadow, every fractured barrier and every dented piece of repurposed machinery told a story of both violence and the promise of hope. The landscape itself, shaped over generations by human hands and hardened by the trials of nature, was now an indelible part of the legacy of those who had gathered to defend it. In the command center, an improvised hub built around weathered maps, battered radios, and digital screens flickering with intermittent updates, strategic voices melded into a single, resolute chorus. Plans were redrawn, contingencies revisited, and the flow of intelligence was analyzed with the precision of seasoned tacticians whose very lives had been defined by such moments. Every unit of the defenders moved in harmony with the collective purpose, to hold their ground at all costs and to turn back the tide of relentless aggression. The sense of unity, so palpable in the quiet moments between the chaos, became a living force, a shield forged from shared history and tempered in the crucible of past hardships. The renegade assault, now entering its final and most desperate phase, unfolded in a series of swift, coordinated maneuvers. Cutter's command had attempted one last surge, a final bid to breach the southern and western flanks of the line. The enemy's movements, though initially fluid and coordinated, began to falter under the relentless, measured counterattacks of the defenders. Every advance was met with a countermeasure that was as much a tribute to the tactical ingenuity of those gathered at Sundance Ridge as it was a statement of defiant resolve. Veterans, whose eyes had seen the horrors of war and the fleeting glimmers of victory, moved with an agility that belied their years, repurposing every tool, every scrap of material, into an instrument of defense. Within the tumult of renewed battle, moments of extraordinary heroism shone brightly. A young volunteer, whose determination was etched into the sweat on his brow and the resolute set of his jaw, held a critical position with the bravery of someone far older than his years. Nearby, a seasoned defender repurposed a rusted plowshare into a makeshift shield, blocking an incoming surge with a steady grace that spoke of decades of hard-earned experience. In these instances, the boundaries between past and present blurred into a single, unyielding continuum of sacrifice, a reminder that every individual act of courage was a vital thread in the enduring fabric of their shared legacy. As the battle wore on, the crescendo of conflict began to subside into a rhythm that hinted at a turning point. The renegade forces, now visibly wearied by the unrelenting resistance and the weight of their own losses, retreated into the darker recesses of the surrounding hills. Their final attempts to disrupt the defenders' line were met with a barrage of coordinated responses that echoed across the expanse, each volley, each strategic maneuver, reinforcing the undeniable truth that the spirit of Sundance Ridge was unbreakable. The very ground trembled with the energy of defiance, as every heartbeat, every whispered command, and every steady breath affirmed that the legacy of this land would endure, no matter the cost. In the waning moments of conflict, as the renegade forces yielded to the inexorable tide of united resistance, a profound silence began to spread across the battlefield. It was a silence imbued with both the sorrow of loss and the hope of a new beginning. The defenders, though battered and scarred, gathered close to tend to their wounds, both visible and those hidden deep within the heart. In the shared silence, they exchanged looks that spoke of unspoken promises, that the sacrifices of the past would never be forgotten, and that the future of their community would be forged in the fires of their collective resolve. Evelyn Mercer, standing at the forefront of this historic moment, surveyed the scene with eyes that had witnessed a lifetime of struggle and triumph. The quiet determination in her gaze, the steady rhythm of her steps along the rugged boundary of her home, and the unyielding spirit that emanated from her very being were the living embodiment of a legacy built over decades of service, sacrifice, and unwavering duty. As the first rays of a new day began to illuminate the horizon, they revealed a landscape transformed by the fierce contest, a land where every scar was a badge of honor, and every tear shed in the heat of battle was a promise of renewal. In the gentle light of dawn, as the defenders slowly gathered their strength to face the inevitable challenges of rebuilding and healing, the story of Sundance Ridge found its final, resolute chapter. The struggle had been long and the cost was great, but in the midst of the destruction lay the seeds of rebirth, a testament to the belief that from the depths of adversity, a community could rise anew. The echoes of every shot fired, every command uttered in urgency, and every silent prayer whispered in the dark would resonate through the ages as a reminder that honor, unity, and the spirit of those who had fought to preserve what was dear could never be extinguished. Thus, in the final moments of that decisive encounter, as the renegade forces melted into the distant horizon and the defenders of Sundance Ridge secured their hard-won ground, a profound sense of accomplishment and hope filled the air. The battle had tested every limit, but it had also reaffirmed the power of shared history and collective will. In the enduring legacy of Evelyn Mercer and the brave souls who had rallied to her side, there lay the unassailable truth that no matter how fierce the storm, the light of community and honor would continue to shine, a beacon for future generations, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. And so, as the sun climbed higher into a sky now washed with the soft colors of hope and renewal, the people of Sundance Ridge began the slow, deliberate process of healing and rebuilding. Their eyes, reflecting the myriad trials of the past and the promise of a better tomorrow, looked forward with a quiet determination. The legacy of that long, hard-fought night, the legacy of sacrifice, valor, and unyielding defiance, would live on in every repaired fence, every rebuilt barn, and every heart that continued to beat with the steadfast rhythm of a community united by purpose. In that final, lingering moment, as nature resumed its gentle song and the land exhaled the tensions of the night, the story of Sundance Ridge was etched into the annals of time, a living testament to the belief that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the light of honor and unity would always prevail, guiding every soul forward into a future forged by the enduring power of hope.